Well, it's such an honor to be here at the library. I've also spent the last 3 days visiting many schools. I think I've been either visited with or talked with about 14 schools in the Toronto system and many other groups of people. And it's also a great joy I like to stay somewhere and have 3 cups of tea. So I probably had about maybe 50 cups of tea so far in Toronto. So I feel like your family, and you might have read the book and know about me, but I also feel honored that I've been in somewhere I've shared a few cups of tea. Again, I'd like to thank a few very special people. Janet McKelvey, who's the chair of the Toronto Public Library Foundation. I don't know if Janet, she might be, well, let's thank her. And also to Richard Boxer, the vice chair, Toronto Public Library Foundation, and Jane Piper, who's your tribal chiefess of the city librarian. Of course, being a very good leader, she's way in the back there, way in the back row. Can you put your hand up, Janet? Give Janet a big round. She's the shaker mover behind the libraries here. And some other people from the Toronto Public Libraries who've been very helpful. They put in hundreds of hours to help get this off the ground are Tina Srabotniak, Linda Hazan, and Wendy Banks. And also, I'd like to thank Eleanor Lefebvre, who's from Mabel's Fables, who's been following me around for a few days. I also got to have some tea there this afternoon, a wonderful treat to go up in the second floor. I'd also like to thank Penguin, the publisher, who they've worked very hard to help in Canada, and I'm very grateful for that. And most of all, I'd like to thank just all of you, the students, the teachers, the librarians, the engineers, the business people, the mothers, the grandmothers and fathers, and the veterans, and everyone for your incredible support. Well, when I first wrote 3 Cups of Tea, I picked the title, and it's in honor of a village chief who taught me that if you really want to do business, you need to have 3 cups of tea. And how many of you read 3 Cups of Tea? Oh, well, maybe we don't need to talk about this, but so my daughter, Amira, is 13. She can rap this, but unfortunately she had some tests this week, so she couldn't come to Canada. But first cup of tea, you're a stranger. Second cup of tea, a friend. And third cup of tea, your family. Now, I picked the title, but the publisher picked the subtitle. And although there's some publishers here, I want to, spare a couple minutes to talk about this little interesting dilemma. The publisher told me the subtitle would be One Man's Mission to Fight Terrorism One School at a Time. And although I'm a military veteran, I was very opposed to that because I said the real reason I do this is to promote peace. Well, they disagreed with me, so finally I went to New York. It was my first time there, and they summoned a jirga. This is like a tribal conference. And it was all the top leaders of the Penguin Putnam Publishing Group, the CEO, the head of marketing, head of publicity. And I told them, we need to have the subtitle talk about promoting peace. But when I got done, they disagreed with me. They said, Greg, this is your first book, and you need to learn a couple things about the publishing industry. Only 1 out of 8 books makes a profit, and 2/3 of all bestsellers are pre-chosen by the publisher. So we'd like to promote your book, but you need to be fighting terrorism so we can pitch the media, and then your book will do well. Well, finally, I conceded, but if you work in Afghanistan or Pakistan or even here in Toronto for a while, you learn that you never settle a deal without driving a hard bargain on the side. So I said, if the hardcover doesn't do well, please change the paperback subtitle to One Man's Mission to Promote Peace, One School at a Time. So the hardcover came out in 2006. It didn't do very well. In January 2007, the subtitle was changed to One Man's Mission to Promote Peace, One School at a Time, and now it's been a New York Times bestseller for 155 weeks in a row. It's also the same thing. And of course, the same thing happened in Canada. The hardcover came out and they changed the subtitle, and now it's been in the top 3 bestsellers for 3 years in a row. Well, fighting terrorism is based in fear, but promoting peace is based in hope. And the real enemy we all face in Canada, in Afghanistan, in Africa, the real enemy is ignorance, and it's ignorance that breeds hatred. And to overcome ignorance, we have to have compassion, we need courage, and most of all, I think it's based in education. Several of the senior U.S. military commanders have read 3 Cups of Tea, and also your defense minister here in Canada. Where's the heart? And your previous Minister of Defense, General Rick Hillier, who I have tremendous respect for. And so they read 3 Cups of Tea. This is General David Petraeus. He's our CENTCOM commander. He's the head of Iraq and Afghanistan. He sent me an email. He said that he had read the book, and there were 3 important points that he had gleaned from the book that he wanted to impart with the troops. Now, being a military general, he summarized them in 3 bullet points. Number 1, we need to listen more. Number 2, we need to have respect, meaning we are there to serve the good people of Afghanistan. And number 3, we must build relationships. So today, 3 Cups of Tea is mandatory reading for all senior U.S. military commanders. It's mandatory reading for all special forces deploying to Afghanistan and for all 2,000 officers in counterinsurgency at the Pentagon every year. Also in many other defense departments around the world. So although I'm a U.S. citizen, I'm basically a child of Africa. I went there when I was 3 months old. That's where I grew up for 15 years. It was a beautiful place. It was post-colonial. It was a new democracy. Julius Nyerere was a very visionary leader, and in Swahili, the word uhuru na umoja means oneness and freedom. I also got to go to school with children from 24 different countries. I got to go to school with Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus, Sikhs, and Buddhists. And to me, that was the way the world was. It was a very beautiful place. My father ended up starting a hospital called the Kilimanjaro Christian Medical Center. This is in the 60s, and he worked very hard to get the hospital started. But one thing my father always insisted on was having local people or Africans in charge. And sometimes that didn't go very well with the Americans or Europeans, because they said, you need a qualified Westerner to run this hospital. But my father insisted that an African run the hospital. And finally, in 1971, the hospital opened up, and my father got up, he gave a little speech, and he said, I have a prediction to make that in 10 years, all the department heads of the hospital will be from Tanzania. Basically, he got laid off a couple months later for having the audacity to believe that the hospital could be run by Africans. Anyways, we came back to the U.S., and unfortunately, my father died from cancer in his mid-40s, but we got the annual report from the hospital 10 years later, and all the department heads were from Tanzania. And even today, 38 years later, all the department heads of the Kilimanjaro Christian Medical Center are from Tanzania. And the important lesson is that people can be empowered to determine their own outcome and destiny. Well, finally, it came time to come back to the USA. One thing that I learned in Africa, too, is a very beautiful proverb. Now, I can't read too well, so let's see if there's any kids here. Let me hand a microphone. Sorry, I'm going to go off the video for a second here. Any students here? There we go. Can you read that up there for us? You want to try to read that? Yeah, what's your name? You're too shy? Well, I was really shy too when I was a boy. Here we go, there's a student. You can do it. You know, when I was young in school, I was really shy too. I would have never agreed to do this, so. You want to stand up, please? What's your name?
Theo.
Everybody, this is Theo, and he's going to read us a beautiful African proverb.
If you educate a boy, you educate an individual. If you educate a girl, you educate a community. African proverb.
Okay, give him a big round. High five. Very good. Very good. Okay, thank you. So, anyhow, how do the gentlemen here feel about this proverb? How do the women feel about the proverb? Oh, so I think gentlemen were a little bit outnumbered here. So it came time to come back to the U.S. I was about 15. I was very excited. But my first day in high school, St. Paul, Minnesota, I got beat up. The kids put a rubbish can over my head, and they started beating on me. And it was because I made a mistake. I said, I'm African. And there was a lot of confusion about that. You know, it's okay to laugh, though, because it was the first time in my life that I learned what the word racism meant. It wasn't in Africa, it was in the U.S. And the irony was in my home country. They learned, in Africa, I never even knew what the word racism meant. Well, we were very poor, so 4 days after high school, I did something that was quite unusual at the time. I joined the U.S. Army, and I did it for 2 reasons. Number 1, to serve my country, and number 2, to get the GI Bill so I could go to university and get an education. It was actually in the military where I met young men and women from all across the U.S. It made me appreciate that we are a great country, not because of our commonality, but because of our great diversity.